A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support.
For weeks, I poured my heart and soul into building the dollhouse, meticulously choosing each piece of wood and paint shade, crafting it to look like a whimsical little home straight out of a fairy tale, knowing it was meant for my niece Lucy, who had always adored the imaginative world of dolls and play. When the dollhouse was finally complete, the hours spent sanding and painting were rewarded by a sense of pride and excitement, until my wife, Emma, walked in and let out a gasp that sent my heart racing. Her eyes lit up with an intensity that made my stomach drop. It dawned on me that she hadn't been speaking about the dollhouse's aesthetic, she had seen something sinister lurking within its walls. That night, long after I turned the lights off, I lay awake, haunted by the strange emotions the dollhouse had invoked, particularly Emma's fixation on it. No matter how much I reassured her that it was just a gift for Lucy, I saw the way she gazed longingly at it, how the corners of her lips turned down whenever I mentioned my niece. I decided to confront my memories of being a kid in my own dollhouse with my sisters, shaping our stories amidst miniature furniture and tiny ceramic trinkets, but now, the joy felt more like a weight tying me to something darker. It was the half-formed whispers echoing throughout our home, the ones I could never quite catch, that clung to my senses each time I entered the room where the dollhouse sat. I imagined it was a mere figment of my mind, until it started talking back. Emma wanted me to keep it, as if it were a living creature, begging for attention and love. Everything about it was unsettling, as if it knew secrets that I was too naive to understand. I tried to rationalize her odd requests for little changes, wanting me to add hatchways and secret rooms, but my hesitance turned to dread when I discovered a hidden compartment while searching for something else, feeling a chill as I uncovered a stack of dusty, yellowed notes, each written in my handwriting from years ago. How was that possible? I had never penned those words, yet they described my life in vivid detail, detailing moments I couldn't recall, feeding stories that were riddled with dark omens, twisted versions of myself fading away piece by piece, reflecting shadows of the girl who used to play with those dolls in our backyard. The next day, I decided to visit my childhood home, searching for some clarity, but all I unearthed was a photo of me at 8 years old, clutching a dollhouse that looked eerily like the one I'd just built. It dawned on me that the dollhouse was never just a toy, it was a vessel of our past, feeding on the very influence of my memories, crowding into the present, manifesting Emma's sorrow into something unfinished, something threatening. When I returned home, I could barely breathe, adrenaline coursing through me as I stood before the dollhouse, determined to finish what I started. That evening, I found Emma curled up in the living room, her cheeks damp, her gaze unfocused, the dollhouse casting twisted shadows in the dim light, like an ominous puppet master controlling our fates, and I found myself hesitating at the threshold, caught between my love for her and the growing fear of what I had unwittingly unleashed. I thought of Lucy, innocent and wide-eyed, and with a shaky breath, I confessed everything. I revealed that I could no longer ignore the haunting specter entwined with the dollhouse's elegance, with all its tightly woven charm. But as the words slipped from my mouth, Emma's face fell, her expression morphing from sadness into something far more sinister, with eyes glimmering under the dim glow like those of a predator. She didn't want to give the dollhouse away, she wanted to use it as a portal, tapping into the childlike wonder wrapped in a nightmarish veneer, to channel an unseen force that had held sway over us since we brought it into our lives, a force that wanted to be fed. The realization hit me like a freight train. I had become the antagonist in my own story, and every decision I made, instead of fueling my creativity, was giving life to a dark energy tethering us to the past, to Lucy. I needed to put an end to it, but how could I destroy something that had become part of the very fabric of our home? That night, drowning in dread, I thought of Lucy crying, clutching her own dreams in a world without shadows. I took a breath, consolidated my courage, and resolved to destroy the dollhouse once and for all. I had to be the one to reclaim my life, our life, but as I approached it, my hands trembling with an inexplicable reluctance, I swear I heard a voice whispering from the depths of the tiny doorways, begging me to put down the hammer, that it would be different this time if I just listened and let it show me the way. How could I fight the weight of wanting to belong? And in that moment, torn between my love for my niece and my wife, shadows cloaked in memories began swarming around the dollhouse, wrapping around me like a shroud, and I understood in my bones that the problem wasn't whether I was the asshole for keeping it from Lucy, it was that they had both deeply intertwined in a way I could never untangle without losing everything. I was never the type to believe in urban legends or ghost stories, but when my sister vanished from a place that officially doesn't exist, I had to reconsider everything. It started on a late August afternoon when Anna decided to take a weekend trip into the mountains, claiming she found this quaint little town called Eldridge Falls that wasn't far off her hiking trail. She was always searching for secluded spots to uncover and photograph, a passion that doubled as an escape from the daily grind of the city. A week passed without any word from her, which wasn't overly concerning until her calls went straight to voicemail. Her texts received no acknowledgement. I drove through the drizzly afternoon towards the GPS coordinates she had last shared, past rusted signposts and withered trees, feeling the uncanny sensation of the world falling away behind me. As the pavement disappeared into gravel, my skepticism mingled with an uneasy realization. I was entering a place unnamed on my maps, its existence whispered in hushed tones by locals who spoke of shadowy occurrences and inexplicable disappearances. The town materialized around a bend, like a page turned too quickly in a forgotten book. Its narrow streets were eerily deserted, the paint flaking off the quaint Victorian-style homes lining them. The air felt stagnant, time suspended in this pocket of forgotten America. Despite the setting sun, a disconcerting lack of sound surrounded me, no crickets, no birds, just oppressive silence. I found the inn Anna had mentioned booking, a rundown relic that seemed abandoned, its sign faintly swinging in foreboding creaks. An old woman behind a dusty front desk eyed me with what seemed like ill-concealed disdain, or perhaps pity. Her deep-set eyes were murky, pools of forgotten memories. When I mentioned my sister, she seemed to shudder slightly, muttering something about people who venture too far. She handed over a key absent-mindedly, as if her mind had wandered to darker realms. My room was something pulled from an old black-and-white photograph, a claustrophobic space draped in shadows tinged with sepia. The first night was unsettling, dreams of Anna whispering warnings blurred with visions of shadowy figures moving just beyond the periphery of my consciousness. I woke in a cold sweat, feeling as if I were being observed. Determined to find any trace of her, I spent the daylight hours exploring the town. Eldridge Falls seemed caught in a time just out of reach from progress, a place where every door seemed firmly shut, every window an opaque eye hiding unknown truths. Asking about Anna only drew blank stares or nervous flutterings. It was clear they knew something, but an undercurrent of fear held them silent. My nights were restless, the dreams becoming more vivid, more oppressive, as if the town, or something within it, was trying to tell me something it couldn't say when awake. On the fourth day, I stumbled onto a path leading out of town, partly hidden by overgrown weeds and a decaying wooden marker with no discernible script. I followed it against the intuitive urge to turn back, my resolve steeled by memories of Anna's laughter. The path wound into a dense forest, draped in mystic fog, the sunlight filtering through in dull whispers. Each step echoed, each rustle set my heart pounding. Then, I found the remnants of a cable car station, cables trailing ominously into the clouds above, and a ledger inside, the last entry in a neat hand, and his unmistakable scrawl, scrawled across the page, met some people. Exploring further. Eldridge Falls hides secrets. The next few hours were a blur of frantic investigation. The townsfolk grew more reticent, their eyes pleading for me to stop. When I visited the local library, an echoing chamber of dust and forgotten lore, the librarian, a gnarled man with eyes that danced like fireflies, whispered frenetically about the history of Eldridge Falls, a settlement erased from official records following a tragic mining incident decades earlier. He hinted at something more sinister than bureaucratic negligence, something ancient, a binding fate inked in blood, he called it. My determination gave way to despair drenched in urgency, but the librarian pressed a fragile envelope into my hand, mumbling about truths no one wanted to see. Inside was a photograph, the grainy depiction of revelers in a bygone festival, Anna's face unmistakably surrounded by unfamiliar figures whose eyes seemed to see beyond the image. I returned to the inn stunned, my skin crawling with the cold breath of the unseen world pressing in closer. That night, my dreams turned violent, as if something wanted out, thrashing within the confines of my mind. When dawn broke, I made my decision, to leave, to bring back help if necessary, but my resolve wavered as a new weight pressed upon me. Anna, whose laughter now echoed mockingly through the stillness, faded into it. But I couldn't just leave without knowing. On my final exploration, I stumbled upon an entrance to what seemed like an underground complex, eerily beckoning and foreboding. An insistent yet inaudible call. Some may say curiosity is dangerous, but perhaps it was kinship that drove me to descend into the darkness, into the belly of Eldridge Falls that morning. As I trudged deeper, electrical cables intertwined with gnarled roots in an unsettling dance beneath the earth, weaving a tapestry of forgotten secrets. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of damp history. The corridor turned and twisted, shadows deepening until the silence broke, not with Anna's voice, but a cacophony of anguished whispers and metallic groans. The voices of past souls tethered to this place beyond time. In the dim light of my phone, I glimpsed her. Anna stood, facing away, her form faint around the edges as if phasing between worlds. Tentatively, yet desperately, I reached out, but her image flickered like a dying bulb, a tender agony in her gaze, the knowledge of a sister forever out of reach yet forever entwined with this place. My heart broke in that eternal instant when everything shattered into tumultuous dark. I awoke at the edge of town as if cast out, the sun bearing down with harsh clarity that crushed any lingering dreamscape. Behind me, the town lay untouched by the passing hours, still holding secrets more profound than the gnarled histories I'd uncovered. They were anecdotal displays, leaving Eldridge Falls unmarked, a place that didn't exist yet persistently lingered in the shadow realm of memory. I never found Anna's physical presence again, but her soft gaze haunted the edges of my perception, in every shadow cast and every whisper caught on the wind. Her disappearance was outshone by the more pressing reality, that I survived the place, marked by truths untold, deeper than any plausible fiction. I understood now, some absences permeate existence more intensely than presence. I left Eldridge Falls behind, but it never truly let go of me. My sister was gone, lost in a town that doesn't exist, yet never completely erased from reality. I had always considered myself a person with common sense, but solitude in the wilderness under the guise of a refreshing retreat shredded that notion. The national park was supposed to be peaceful, an antidote to months of windowless cubicle life, where the closest I got to nature were potted plants begging for relief. I set out one early morning just as dawn fished through the pine trees, beads of dew bowing branches, the air crisply punctuated by distant bird calls. I aimed for a trail less traveled, thinking it poetic and perfectly eccentric until that fateful moment when my left foot sank with a sickening snap and the sharp, cruel jaws of a bear trap clamped around my leg. Pain, like liquid fire, spiked upwards as I fell, breath punched from my lungs, mingled with an animal scream I barely recognized as mine. Panicking, scrambling for my phone, I cursed my decision to go off-grid. No reception bars mocked me. It took all my strength to suppress the creeping dread and examine the trap tearing into my calves, a rusted contraption from another century, buried under foliage like a malignant predator. Tugging did nothing but drive the teeth deeper, the forest whispering, almost taunting my predicament. Hours passed, sky bruising into fearful purples and black, and the forest awoke in its nocturnal symphony, each crackle of a snapping twig amplified until it seized my heart in a vice grip. Then came the light, erratic beams swaying between trees, shadows slithering in their wake, and with it, the hushed footfalls. Relief surged briefly through the agony. Someone was here. A figure emerged, cloaked in a darkness that danced with the bobbing flashlight. But hope spotted and fled when I caught sight of what they held, a hunting rifle cradled casually like an extension of their arm. This wasn't a ranger. My voice, increasingly hoarse, cut through. Help. I'm stuck. Hoping to summon humanity from the dark silhouette. The man approached with a predator's patience, checking the sharp iron, and then gazing at me with unreadable eyes, marked by a solemn, almost reverent silence. You shouldn't have come here. The voice finally dripped like tar, words dense and deliberate. Fear and confusion churned, God's forgotten woods and a lone man bedecked with danger and secrets. It struck me like a horror onset, the inescapable kind. My plea somersaulted into the void as he took a seat on a rotten log, inspecting the trap hungrily, like an achievement well earned. It feeds on despair, he murmured, stroking the jagged metal like one would a cherished pet. Questions volleyed through my mind, irrationally unable to dislodge the absurdity of his words. You're going to die, the hunter's voice intoned with grim certainty, but you're mine to claim. Every bit of ancestral survival instinct bellowed to me as adrenaline wrestled with torment. Whatever deranged ritual this stranger had in mind, it was something I wouldn't, accept. Small talk and sanity clung by their fingernails to the bizarre calm I forced upon myself. I lied. I told him friends were on the way, hoping it would dissuade whatever plans boiled behind those inscrutable eyes. He simply laughed, low and guttural, dismissing the notion like a child's scattered dreams. His world devoid of mercy had no room for the nonsensical concept of rescue. Then, beneath my anguish-racked body, danced the creeping sensation of escape, a jagged rock half buried in the dirt. My time with that damn trap wasn't wasted. Flexing against the pain, I slowly worked to wedge it against the rusted iron. Minutes melted into centuries as the night deepened and the hunter's vigilance waned, indulging in the sick hospitality of a leisurely menace. Just as the subtle click of stone leverage whispered freedom, he rose, the silhouette's stance spelling finality. In one desperate, last-ditch gamble, I threw all my weight on the rock. A creak, the trap unfurling its metal maw just enough to wrest my bloodied limb free. Pain gouged its signature on every nerve as I bolted, adrenaline dulling the reality that every step was another drop closer to madness. Branches whipped at my face, the forest swallowing my ragged breath as panic-stripped plans flared and vanished in the dark. Behind me, his voice, the terror of his pursuit, thudded through twilight trees, closing in like ink spreading through clear waters. The world cinched with nightmare rhythm, my flight blind, driven by raw instinct unrefined by conscious thought until I skidded onto a larger trail. In the moon-drenched clearing laid Salvation, an abandoned ranger outpost, aged yet sturdy. Scrambling inside, I slammed the door, my heartbeat synchronized with the thunderous hammering against weakened wood. Shelved within were old flares and a radio begging for deliverance. Luck, that long-forgotten ally, gifted me faint static slowly transforming to coherent plea, my voice echoing into the ether, a lifeline cast through the void. Crack. The door shivered under assault, splintering in refusal to yield. I held the flare ready, my mind rupturing under the pressure of an eternal night distilled into mere moments. But then, the chest-thumping chorus of helicopters announced themselves, a revelation splintering terror's monologue. The hunter's silhouette hesitated, a flicker of something, a defeat, madness, the inconsolable loss of a twisted game, in his stance before shadows reclaimed him. Rescue descended in a cacophony of light and sound, the authorities unspooling questions I couldn't answer as they bundled me into safety's embrace. Now, grounded in a hospital where the mundane monotony of ceiling tiles provides a certain comfort, questions coil around me like shadows. Who was that man, and what ritual did those woods demand? The painkillers blur the line between memory and dream, yet I know one night, I may see his spectre looming at the end of my bed, eyes brimming with the promise of stories left untold, of an absurd, dark hunt forest could never quite devour. But even amidst this fear, a thought persists, a chilling, burgeoning premonition. Would the bear trap remain, teeth blistered and waiting, for someone else unsuspecting to step into its hellish story? Things had been tense between Kelly and me ever since the engagement. Karen, Kelly's mother, had disapproved from day one. She believed I wasn't career-focused enough for her daughter, which was ironic given that my startup was finally taking off. My relationship with Kelly seemed like a perfect story, college sweethearts who defied odds and family expectations to be together. But Karen's hovering presence constantly loomed over us like a storm about to break. Our engagement was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance for happiness, yet when Karen unexpectedly passed away, everything turned upside down. One night, just after dinner, Kelly asked if I would help pay for Karen's funeral. The words left me stunned. It wasn't that I couldn't afford it, the startup had its ups and downs, but I could manage. It was the principle of it. Karen had never treated me with an ounce of kindness or respect. Every holiday, every birthday, she found ways to insult me in ways that Kelly always seemed to dismiss as her stress talking. Despite all this, I had tried to be understanding, putting on a brave face for Kelly's sake. Now, it felt like a final betrayal, a strange request from the love of my life but in some twisted shape that no longer felt loving, more like an obligation. Kelly's plea echoed around my mind, she didn't have much, and it's the least we can do. We. That word stung, as if now I were suddenly part of a collective unity that, when it came to Karen, had always been absent. I tried to reason through my conflicting feelings, muttering something about how I would think about it, knowing in my gut my answer was likely a solid no. The night stretched on with its oppressive silence. Kelly retreated to the bedroom, leaving me alone with my thoughts, the flickering light of the TV the only companion. It was then that I noticed the cold air in the room, despite the furnace working. The temperature had dipped unnaturally, sending a shiver twisting up my spine. The pictures on the walls, their occupants staring vacantly, deepened the unease that danced along my conscious mind. Just as I dismissed it as nothing more than a freak draft, the light flickered once more before plunging the room into darkness. A power outage? Yet it felt more personal, somehow. The atmosphere grew heavy, pressing against my temples as my own heartbeat filled the silence. Fumbling for the flashlight on the coffee table, I called out to Kelly, but she didn't respond. The feeble beam cut through the dark, casting long shadows that seemed to quiver with life. As my eyes adjusted, I saw her, Karen, or at least something that wore her face. She stood by the window, illuminated by the ambient glow of the streetlights filtering in. Her expression was twisted in hatred, every part of her resonating the disdain she'd shown in life but now magnified, amplified. She didn't move, didn't speak, yet a voice filled my head, dripping with contempt and malice. For all you took from her, you owe her this much. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath quickening as I stumbled away. This wasn't real, couldn't be real. The specter vanished as abruptly as it had appeared, leaving me shaking, questioning my sanity. But the chill remained, permeating the very air. Kelly was still not responding, and a dread clawed its way through me as I pushed the bedroom door. It opened softly to reveal her peacefully asleep, completely unaware of the turmoil that had taken place within our home. I couldn't bring myself to wake her, not like this. Instead, I lay beside her, eyes fixed on the ceiling, chaos swirling in my mind. The next few days were a blur. Kelly seemed oblivious, completely and mercifully unaware of what I had witnessed. Karen's funeral approached, every step toward it feeling like it pulled me, dragged me toward an abyss I feared to name. As much as I tried to convince myself it was all stress, all the hallucination of a mind overworked, depleted, the memory clung to me. Every shadow seemed to hide her, every cold draft was a whisper of her presence. The day of the funeral arrived under gray skies threatening rain. I decided, in a moment of clarity or perhaps surrender, that I would contribute. Not because she had convinced me in life or even in that haunting moment, but because Kelly deserved peace. The ceremony was a somber affair, hushed tones and stolen glances that I pretended not to notice. As we laid her to rest, the clouds broke and the first drops of rain fell, mingling with silent tears. I would never tell Kelly what I saw, not fully. Instead, I held her hand, shared her grief, and whispered reassurances against the cold reality of our shared silence. Yet, every so often, in the quiet moments when the world fades, I feel a chill, a reminder of that darkened room, of promises extracted from the depths of fear. And as much as I want to believe in moving on, some specters never fully release their hold. When we signed up for Camp Alderwood, the brochure promised adventure, friendship, and memories to last a lifetime. Nestled deep in the untouched forests of Vermont, the camp boasted an expansive lake, rustic cabins, and an escape from the electronic world most of us craved. Our parents saw it as a perfect getaway from our screens, a chance to reconnect with nature, as my mom enthusiastically put it. With a small group of friends, I boarded the rickety bus that would carry us and a dozen other kids into what we thought was going to be a summer of fun and exploration. For the first few days, the camp was exactly what we'd envisioned. We spent mornings perfecting our archery skills, not that I was any good, evenings by the campfire sending s'mores sliding into our stomachs, and afternoons swimming in the glistening lake, whose depths seemed endless and oh so inviting under the sun's watery gaze. Our counselors, especially Mark and Jess, were cool, and stories of their college adventures made them seem older and wiser than their mere 7-year seniority over us should have justified. But even the best of stories have their shadows, and it was on the midnight of our 5th day that the idyllic facade began to peel back. The first inkling of something wrong came when Ella, a girl from the cabin next to mine, went missing after a night hike led by another counselor, Gwen. At first, they told us she must have just gotten lost, but something about the way Gwen's voice quivered while reporting the incident struck me as off. Ella's parents were informed, or so we were told, and yet no police showed up, no search parties apart from us hapless kids were organized, and the incident was brushed off far more easily than seemed appropriate. Then came the second disappearance. Daniel, one of my closer friends, failed to return from a solo canoe trip 3 days later. Unease settled over the camp like an unwanted chill, whispers of campfire stories turned dark with anxious reality. We were assured everything was under control, to stick together, and stay within the marked areas of the campground. But one night, as the quiet tension swelled, Tom, the jokester of our crew, whispered what we all feared: what if we weren't the only ones being hunted? Curiosity overtook fear as we started piecing together the shreds of clues around us. It was Kali, the most resourceful among us, who discovered a weathered old map ducked behind a loose floorboard in our cabin. The map marked paths and clearings we didn't recognize from any hikes and was frayed with age, annotated with small, cryptic symbols. It hinted at hunts but didn't make sense until we stumbled upon a hidden door beneath the camp's toolshed, revealing a staircase into a dank basement outfitted with surveillance equipment aimed at our cabins and communal areas. The realization sank in heavy. Alderwood was a front, a hunting ground not for the wildlife we often heard rustling the canopy, but for people. A nauseating thrill of terror gripped our small group. We decided our only chance was to alert anyone outside of camp, easier said than done with our phones impounded for the duration of our stay, and most of the adults likely in on the grim secret. Kali, with nerves of steel, suggested we slip away during a strategic, chaotic moment when the counselors would least expect it. The camp was scheduled for an all-night scavenger hunt, a festive finale we wouldn't be rejoining as their prey. Our hearts throbbed like birds trapped in cages as the hunt began, players marked with brightly colored bands. We wore the neutrality of the watchful forest, slipping from tree to tree once the game was well underway, their laughter fading into background static. Beneath the cloak of midnight, the woods turned sinister, every branch a claw ready to snatch at us. We'd realized there were sensors and cameras, more than we could easily dodge, but not all their eyes could be everywhere. Kali led us to an overlooked trail that seemed to promise safety with its thorns and dense underbrush. We had little, apart from sheer adrenaline and the desperation to avoid becoming the next tale of a camper gone awry. Hours passed with painstaking quietude, our feet sore and our breaths short. Perpetually, the fear of pursuit rendered us silent, until finally, the vague buzz of chatter and car engines came as distant whispers through the trees. We stumbled upon the highway just as dawn's early light melted the horizon, silhouettes cast long from our exhausted bodies as travelers on the road began their daily routines, oblivious to the terror we'd left behind. A passing trucker eventually stopped, incredulous at our dirt-streaked faces, wide eyes, and breathy tail, liberally sown with emissions to retain our coherence. Help came quickly after that, the promise of a police presence, an investigation we might never truly know the outcome of, but relief enough that we'd crossed out of bounds of that hellish preserve. Looking back, it shames me to admit that even though I escaped, not all of us were so fortunate. Ella, Daniel, and who knows how many others remain unaccounted for. Their faces haunt my dreams, not for their lack of closure, but because I recognize that even today, places like Camp Alderwood might still exist, cleverly concealed as idyllic escapes, when in reality they serve another, darker purpose. When I first posted an r/a-myth asshole, I thought I was just venting. Who would have imagined the whole thing would unravel into a night of unearthly horror that I'm still struggling to comprehend? It began with a regular visit from my sister and her 6-year-old son, Alex. I met them in the kitchen, half listening to Alex chat about his obsession with trains, as I brewed myself a particularly large glass of iced coffee. It was one of those oversized novelty mugs, and for whatever reason that day, I needed the caffeine boost. My sister grimaced when she saw me pour it, making some passing comment about how Alex shouldn't have too much caffeine, even though I, an adult, was the only one drinking it. We laughed it off, dismissing it as another overprotective parent moment. But something shifted in Alex's demeanor as I took that first sip. His chatter stopped abruptly, his eyes fixating on the mug with a strange intensity. I thought he was just curious, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood at attention when he whispered, "The keeper doesn't like when people drink from his cup." Shivers ran down my spine, the air becoming inexplicably heavy and cold. "Keeper? What are you talking about, Alex?" I asked, trying to maintain a light tone. He looked up, eyes wide and sincere, stating, "He's the one who watches while we sleep." I laughed nervously, thinking it was just a child's imagination spinning tales. But the atmosphere grew eerily tense, the thin line between reality and imagination blurrier than I'd like. That afternoon, the incident slipped from my mind until later when I was alone, the skies outside darkening, encased in a silence that buzzed like static electricity. As I sat in the living room scrolling through my phone, I stumbled upon a post about ancient artifacts with cursed bindings and couldn't help but think of Alex's comment. The hairs on my arm stood again when the room's temperature dropped noticeably, and the lights flickered as though arguing with the electricity to stay on. Just then, a deep, resonating hum began to echo through the walls, almost like a low growl vibrating through the house's bones. I jumped to my feet, the mug forgotten next to my phone, when I noticed a shadowy figure at the periphery of my vision, near the kitchen doorway where the mug now sat innocently enough on the counter. Moving closer, I saw it, a figure that seemed to slither before solidifying into a distinct shape. It was tall, impossibly tall, and its presence loomed over the small confines of my kitchen as if the very dimensions of reality bent to accommodate its form. I blinked rapidly, hoping my eyes were playing tricks on me, but the shadow stood firm. For a heartbeat, everything was silent, even the hum had stopped, and the air seemed suspended in that impossible moment. The keeper, if that's what it was, stood there, its eyes, or what seemed like the absence of them, piercing through me, with a knowing gaze that felt ancient and hollow. "You're not supposed to drink from his cup," Alex's voice echoed distantly in my mind, his innocent expression a stark contrast to the malevolent energy now suffusing the room. I felt my grip on reality loosening as the shadow swirled into an intense vortex, the room spinning crazily around me, objects rattling and clattering off their perches. Panic surged through me, a white-hot streak as I stumbled back, catching my reflection in the hallway mirror as the shadow loomed ever closer. My own reflection began to distort, twisting my features into a mask of terror until it coalesced into something else entirely, Something darkly familiar, yet wholly inhuman. The terror in my mirror image's eyes screamed warnings I couldn't hear over the rising, roaring crescendo in my mind. I felt pulled toward the abyss of that black, mirthless gaze, drawn into a whispered conversation my soul ached to flee from. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the room fell silent, the shadow retracting and curling in on itself before disappearing into the depths of its own darkness. I was left gasping on the floor, the lights steady again, the air warm, deceptively normal. I glanced at the mug on the counter, the coffee half finished, knowing the mundane scene was a lie, a thin veil over the realms bleeding into my own reality. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually, I gathered the courage to stand and poured the remaining coffee down the sink, my fingers shaking as they clutched the slippery handle. Every sound was now a dreaded footfall to me, each rustle an echo of the nightmare I was tethered to. Alex's words lingered in the air, effigies of a truth beyond childhood fantasy, proving I had crossed into a plane not meant for people like me, intruders where we didn't belong. That night, sleep was an elusive phantom, hovering just out of reach while shadows danced mockingly at the edges of my vision, whispering secrets they alone were privy to. I was now the one who watched, the one who vigilantly guarded against the dark encroachments unraveling at the boundary between worlds. When morning spilled its forgiving light, things were different, my coffee mug now missing, an absence that screamed loudly in the glaring sunlight. Did I misplace it, or had someone, taken it as a reminder of my transgressions? I posted an AITA seeking reassurance, desperate to ground myself in the reality I had chosen to ignore for far too long, hoping someone could tell me, reassure me, that it was all just caffeine-fueled paranoia. But deep down, I knew the truth, that by simply indulging in that large glass of coffee, I'd sipped from more than just a mug but had taken a forbidden draught from a well of secrets older than time itself, and now, the keeper watches, just as Alex warned. I'm not sure where to start, so I'll just dive right in. My name is Kyle. I'm 31 years old, and my life makes less sense every morning I wake up. It's not the usual existential dread most people my age drown in, this is something beyond that, something I can barely comprehend myself. Until last month, I worked in a cubicle farm, the kind where people sit, slowly turning into husks under the fluorescent glare and false sense of productivity. But something changed that afternoon. It was just another mundane Tuesday, people were shuffling in from their lunch breaks, with stale coffee cups clutched closely as if they were holy relics, trying to squeeze out the last few ounces of whatever was left of their souls to get through another workday. My mind was in a haze, a dull gray fog that had become all too familiar. My phone buzzed, breaking the monotony as I glanced down with little interest. The notification read, "Confession incoming at 3:31 p.m. Annoyed, I dismissed it, chalking it up to some spam. But then, the same notification persisted every half minute, only this time, the text changed slightly, "Confession, Kyle, open the door at 3:31 p.m. It was unnerving, the specificity of it, yet my curiosity was piqued despite the knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. Time crawled by, as I watched the clock's hands twitch towards 3:31 p.m. Exactly at that second, a loud knock came from the office door, odd since visitors weren't allowed without appointments. People seemed oblivious, noses buried in screens, drones only concerned with their own grind. With bated breath I got up, drawn by an inexplicable urge to answer it. I turned the knob slowly, feeling as if I was on the brink of unveiling some grand, uncanny truth behind reality. The door swung open onto a hallway I'd never seen before, definitely not the stale corridor of my office floor. It was drenched in shadow, yet distinctly alive, humming with an unseen energy that made the hairs on my flesh stand on end. And that's when I saw it, a reflection of myself staring back at me from a pool of dark water seeping from between the ancient stone tiles. But this figure was disheveled, hollow-cheeked with darkness pooling beneath its eyes, and it was whispering something in a cadence I couldn't comprehend, yet instinctively knew was meant for me. In those murmurings, I heard fragments of a life not entirely my own, parents who tightened their reins too hard, the pressure to exceed in everything but the crumbling under the weight of their expectations, visions of late nights under a single lamp, poring over books that held no answers, a series of lonely weekends where the silence pressed in like a tangible force. My reflection then did the unthinkable, it blinked, and as its eyes opened, they were clear with a resolution I didn't possess. I was transfixed, caught completely out of time and place, wondering if this was some twisted Halloween prank pulled by a miserable co-worker. The reflection spoke, coldly, yet with a familiarity that gnawed at my insides. "Kyle, you're not alone in this confession. But you must see the truth of yourself before it's too late." Without realizing, I was in the hallway. The office behind me vanished. I arrived at a crossroads, with the hallway stretching infinitely on either side, lined with countless doors almost identical in every way. The only sound was a soft patter, like distant rain, drawing nearer. The shadows grew deeper, swallowing the ends of the hallway like some creeping abyss. A weight settled over me, too stifling to ignore. When I moved toward a particular door, drawn by an unseen force. This door bore a nameplate: Kyle Jennings, my name, and beneath it, the words that have haunted me ever since: eternal confession. Something inside commanded me to turn away, but my hand steadied itself against the knob, mind clouded with unresolved memories and the message my doppelganger imparted me. I pushed it open and instantly felt a vortex of memories surge through. I was there, standing acutely aware of replications of pivotal moments where I could almost feel my past selves making the same mistakes. Down another hallway, and another, each door marked with phases of my life: birthdays forgotten, friendships neglected, dreams unfulfilled. Where time curved in on itself, I saw the specters of those I wronged. Haunting eyes burned into mine as if asking for justification I didn't possess. Cold realization washed over me, rapidly expanding into a deafening roar of self-confrontation. All the blame, regret, the oppressive weight of expectations, and the inevitable isolation of my ego. I was trapped, alongside phantoms equally lost to their confessions. I had unwittingly stumbled into a limbo of contrition, every door a confessional unto itself. This wasn't just for me, it was an interstice where those who had reached their breaking point chose to pause, caught between moving on and confessing their truths. Panic rose, clawing at my throat, but deep within, a strange sense of belonging also fluttered, a mirror of acknowledgement. Here was a quaint space crafted from exponential despair, yet weirdly comforting, a testament that I was not alone in my solitude. A dim light flickered from down the hall where the shadows began, and within that subtle glow, amidst whispers of the countless before me, there was a choice: either to embrace it, succumb, and drift eternally lost, or turn around, face the darkened path left behind, and reclaim fragments littered with tentative hopes and renewal. Standing there at the edge of where comprehension and relinquishment blurred, I realized what must be done. It wasn't about finding the point in going on, perhaps it was about living with the uncertainty, finding meaning in the echoes even when they were veiled. The path didn't have to be clear, but it had to be traversed. I took one backward glance into the depths of missed confessions before striding purposefully back, embracing each silent step forward. If this place could exist, then perhaps I could write my own confession on a blank page, not bound by echoes but by the authentic desire to strive onwards despite the fog. Maybe, just maybe, that's where I might begin to see my point. Sure, here's a story inspired by the title and designed to reflect the style of r/no-sleep subreddit posts. When I first grounded my 15-year-old daughter, Lily, for coloring her hair, I never thought it would unravel into something beyond any parent's realm of experience. It wasn't even about the hair color, midnight black with streaks of violet, but more about her doing it secretly at a friend's house overnight, returning the next morning with a smirk that screamed rebellion. After all, in a small town like ours, everything drips with gossip and expectations. Though I was strict, my wife always said boundaries made children feel safe, and since her passing, I've tried to be both the anchor and the ship for Lily. But last Friday changed everything. When Lily clicked the bedroom door shut, the sharp click resonated like a countdown to an unseen climax, spiraling the mundane into the surreal. Strange things began to happen in our small, creaky house perched on the edge of the woods, a house, I might add, with a history long intertwined with whispered tales of hauntings and echoes of lost children murmured in the dead of night. The first night, I heard whispers shimmering through the walls, like the crackling static of an old radio with a twisted dial, as if the house was tuning into some otherworldly station. Chalk it up to my overactive imagination or parental paranoia, I ignored the haunting murmur in favor of a glass of whiskey. But it was hard to ignore what happened at exactly 3:15 a.m. when the power blew, plunging the entire house into absolute darkness before flickering back, a strobe effect betraying the sinister silhouettes that seemed to dance just beyond the grasp of shadows at the edge of Lily's room. I barged in, calling her name, only to find her sitting cross-legged on her bed, her hair faintly luminescent in the moon's silver glow filtering through the window. Her eyes were wide open, but disturbingly blank, like she was reading something invisible to all but her. When she spoke, it wasn't her voice, it was like several voices tangled together, speaking through her entangled threads of history and time. I swear one was my wife's soft lilt entwined among them, giving me chills. "Only boundaries that are real can bleed," she said, her mouth forming the words with unnatural precision. Moments later, she blinked, gasped, and clutched her head as if awakening from a fractured nightmare. The color leached from her hair into the room's ambient light, leaving me questioning my grip on reality. I tried calling our town's only psychiatrist, Dr. Weathers, but his office phone droned endlessly, no doubt silenced by a storm wreaking havoc on communication lines, or perhaps by the whispering conspiracy of fate itself. The dawn broke, dull and tired, as shadows reluctantly peeled off night's cloak, retreating with one lingering gaze back at us, now housed in an uneasy purgatory. Exhaustion knitted itself into the fabric of the following days as Lily seemed fine, oblivious to the nightly events, her life meshing perfectly with the humdrum of teenage existence, full of forgotten homework and secretive conversations with friends whose voices cracked with growing maturity. However, the house knew different, its sentience revealing in flickering lights and footsteps echoing in the silence when no one was there. Desperate, I dove into the town archives, chasing the paper trail of Hawkins estate folklores, where my research unveiled chilling narrative threads. Our house was built on land darkened by sacrifice and secrets, a patch of cursed earth, they said, laden with iron blood promises and twisted rituals dating back generations to settlers who claimed their progeny could harness a rare gift, a link to both seen and unseen. That realization shattered my skepticism like a dark mirror. As the third night descended, thick with an ethereal mist outside, my worst fears were realized. Lily, lure for such malignant presences, was again occupied by a fleet of voices beyond time's narrow corridor. This time she directed me outside, compelled by an unseen urge, her shadow moving with the eerie grace of something not altogether bound by the physical laws of our world. The night air bit with the sharp teeth of winter's imminent approach as we reached the old well at the edge of our property, an ancient stone gullet of earth posteriorly hidden beneath decades of overgrowth. Lily knelt and placed her hands on the stones, humming a song long forgotten, words twisted like thorns caught in a wind, yet strangely comforting in their dissonance. Her hair, silken threads of universe's tapestry, shimmered once more. The earth tremored, obedient to some clandestine summoning, and began to whisper back, an unintelligible cacophony, entangled whispers from the bones of the earth echoing with nightmarish history. I fumbled for my cell, shook it violently against the likelihood of it having mysteriously died at this perilous hour, but the lens captured an apparition gravely superimposed upon my daughter's frame, silhouettes of colonial children, streaked with otherworldly luminescence, staring with eyes that mirrored nothing but the infinite. Overwhelmed by a relentless barrage of emotions and primal fear, I reached for her, ripping her away from the edge, and as the vision faded like dissipating clouds, our house felt different, as if a titanic weight had been lifted. It was suddenly just a house again. The whispers ceased, leaving a silence thicker than the greatest cacophony I'd ever known. In time, Lily sobered from her trans-dimensional reverie, her hair finally dimming to a deep brown chestnut, a grandeur locked away perhaps for future unearthing, a family Pandora's box now closed and hidden forever. The incident forged in us a bond, an unspoken understanding of boundaries not meant to be challenged, not unless we were willing to face bleeding truths laid bare by unseen forces. We gradually mended the fracture in our relationship, the rift now sewn shut with an enforced tenderness and a vow, locked in the depth of our eyes each time her hair shone in the sun, not to disturb the roots hidden in the darkness again. So was I the asshole for grounding her? Perhaps in thoughtless diversions, but beyond, in fathoms dark, I perhaps saved us both from becoming just more whispers on the wind. I always hated going to family gatherings at my parents' house because of my older brother, Mark. He had this knack for picking apart every flaw and emotional moment I ever had, a habit that stemmed back to when we were kids. Our last family dinner turned particularly sinister and has left me questioning whether I was right or wrong in finally snapping. It was meant to be a small, quiet evening watching a movie with our family and some friends of Mark, who had recently returned home after his abrupt breakup with his fiancée, a woman so sweet it seemed impossible she had ever seen a bad day. We were halfway through a horror flick when a particularly emotional scene came on, hitting too close to home for reasons I hadn't quite prepared myself to confront that night. My eyes welled up, and I tried my best to discreetly wipe the tears away. That's when Mark, sitting across the room with a self-satisfied smirk plastered across his face, decided to pipe up in front of everyone. "Oh look, here comes the waterworks. You still cry like a toddler, huh? Man up, won't you?" His words cut through the room sharper than the knife we had just seen on screen, and the laughter that followed from his friends was like a chorus of taunting ghosts echoing through the shadowed spaces of my mind. I felt my stomach coil like a snake ready to strike, embarrassment roiling into anger, and before I knew it, my voice was slicing back across the room, louder and more intense than I'd meant it to be. "At least I can show my emotions, unlike you," I began, "and maybe that's why she left." Ever thought you deserved to be dumped, Mark? The statement dropped like a bomb. Silence fell over us, thick and suffocating. My parents froze, tension straining their polite smiles into grimaces, and Mark's friends looked anywhere but at him or me. Mark's expression changed rapidly from shock to something darker, something that, in retrospect, I should have been wary of, reminiscent of an old, sleeping wound being torn open. It was as if time slowed, the room contracted, and for a heartbeat, everything felt fragile, like the tenuous calm before a storm. Mark stood up abruptly, his chair groaning across the wooden floor, and the air itself seemed to swell with an imminent threat I couldn't place. It was then, from somewhere down the lonely corridors of my memory, the warnings I had ignored started to surface, and I recalled the whispered rumors surrounding his breakup. No one had discussed it openly, but his fiancée's disappearance and their sudden separation wasn't due to a simple lover spat. There had been whispers of control, stories of nights that didn't end well, and the unnerving prospect that Mark wasn't just the brother who taunted me, but someone capable of more. Far more sinister things than childish torment. In that moment of confrontation, something shifted in his gaze, a flicker of malice I wasn't prepared to comprehend. He took a step towards me, and instinct kicked in. A deep-rooted survival instinct that set my heart racing. My mind flashed to the stories I'd heard about his temper, the reason his fiancée left in the dead of night, never to come back. The room felt like it was tilting, bringing with it a bizarre clarity. I'd crossed a line with someone unpredictable, someone I should have feared rather than challenged. I mumbled an apology, my voice barely audible over the rush of blood in my ears, and excused myself, stumbling into the cold, damp night. Outside, the wind howled like a beast from the depths, giving voice to the fierce whirling inside me. The night cloaked me, reminding me of all the times I had felt insignificant, but no longer safe, now submerged in a sea of my own making. I stumbled home under the weight of all I had uncovered, the quiet darkness my only companion, wondering if I'd not only incited a family feud but unearthed the true reason behind my brother's broken engagement, a secret that even now threatens to invade my every waking moment. And I can't shake the feeling that I've invited something dreadful into my life just by speaking those words, by cracking the facade of family harmony, provoking something in Mark that cannot be undone. Now, as I sit here writing this, each creak of the floorboards and every whispering gust sends chills down my spine. Part of me wonders if I'm merely awaiting retribution for speaking the harsh truth no one dared to face, or worse, waiting for Mark himself to come knocking. I can't tell if the shadows at my window are just a trick of the night or if they're carrying his lurking silhouette, awaiting a moment of confrontation I may not survive. Every story has a beginning, but what if the beginning of my story was just an illusion? I once thought I accidentally killed my wife, Mary. It was a chilly November night, the kind where the clouds veil the moon and cloak the world in a deeper darkness. We were arguing, as we often did when the days got shorter and the shadows stretched longer. The issue that night, something unbelievably trivial in hindsight, boiled to the surface until neither of us held back. The next thing I remember, she was lying at the bottom of the stairs, her neck twisted at an unnatural angle, eyes staring blankly past me. Panic-stricken, I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my ears, an overwhelming tide of dread washing over me as I struggled to grapple with the reality of what I'd done. I didn't call the police. I didn't really know why, maybe it was the shock, or the instinctual drive to hide one's misdeeds. For hours I paced, trying to figure out my next move, when a knock at the door froze my blood. It was the landlord, Mr. Grayson, concerned about the noise or the lack of it, perhaps. Desperation clawed at me, and in those surreal moments, I considered everything from fleeing to confessing. But upon opening the door, the strangest thing happened. Mary, or someone who was an almost perfect copy of her, walked past him into the house, as if nothing had happened. "Sorry, slipped a little, love," she laughed, her voice eerily cheerful, though her eyes restlessly flickered about, like a trapped thing seeking freedom. I stood there dumbfounded, caught between immense relief and a new kind of dread. That night, I gingerly approached her, questions stuck in my throat. She acted normal, meticulously folding laundry, humming a tune I didn't recognize. But something was deeply off. It was in the details, how her clothes were slightly different, how she seemed to remember things that never happened, while forgetting others that did. The nagging questions I buried soon grew into a compulsion I could no longer ignore. The next day, I called her parents hoping they could assure me that all was well, but to my utter horror, they claimed they never had a daughter. The phone call ended with laughter, the kind that chilled my spine, as if they were part of some cruel joke. Attempting to regain some sanity, I visited our marriage counselor, collecting proof of her existence. He looked perplexed, flipped through his records, yet found no Mary under my name. Instead, he handed me a photo of myself sitting alone, a bewildered smile on my face. Days turned to weeks. I went through her possessions, scavenging for any shred of evidence of our life together, but her clothes, her books, her shoes, they seemed aged with dust, artifacts belonging to someone who had long faded from this world. I considered seeing a doctor, fearing I might be slipping into madness, but paranoia whispered that I couldn't trust anyone with this truth. Each night, she slept next to me, her presence both comfort and curse, my mind rebelling against the notion that she might be a figment, a ghost woven from my guilt and longing. Who was this woman sharing my bed? Was she flesh and blood, or a specter masquerading in skin? Investigating further, I discovered something buried, an old journal scribed in my hand, detailing a life with Mary, dates and events meticulously recorded that ended abruptly with a scrawled note: "She comes from a place where reality's veil thins. She was never meant to be here." I trembled as the rest of the page was blurred like it had been swallowed by a memory unstuck from time. Struggling to understand, I decided to confront this imposter directly. "What happened that night?" I demanded, voice cracking like old paint. Her eyes flickered again, momentarily revealing something ancient and inscrutable. "I was never meant to stay," she whispered, her voice a melody of emotion intertwined with remorse. In that moment, reality fractured, and I glimpsed another world, a vast expanse of shadows twisted between glimpses of strange landscapes where the rules of physics dissolved. Suddenly, Mary, if that was her name, reached out, lightly traced her fingers across my cheek, a touch both familiar yet alien. Her skin felt cold, not the kind from winter's chill, but from deep space, endlessly vast and devoid of life. "You have to let me go," she murmured, a single tear trailing a luminous path down her cheek before her form flickered like a fading signal from a lonely star. Just as quickly, reality slammed back into place, yet the emptiness in my home, in my heart, remained. The police came the following morning with questions about Mary's disappearance, a victim of my anguished call made in the throes of my spiraling reality. The world holds strange truths, truths that sometimes slip between worlds. To friends and neighbors, there was no Mary, no wife ever existed in this world. Yet I know different. In deep silence, a framed photograph on my mantel shows us together, and in my heart, the shadow of a shared laugh lingers, fragmented but unyielding. People say when you lose someone, a piece of them stays in your world, alive in memory, haunting in reality, but what if they were never supposed to exist at all? Confession time, my memory is a lot worse than I let anyone know. You might think that's just me covering up for your typical forgetful habits, like leaving keys in the fridge or missing birthdays, but it's way beyond that. It started subtly during my last semester of college. I'd find myself misplacing things or spacing out during conversations. My friends called it senioritis, but it felt different. I would lose entire chunks of time, blanking out only to find myself in places I didn't recognize, as if someone hit a skip button on my life. I tried to brush it off. Who wouldn't? Convince yourself there's nothing wrong, just stress or fatigue, but denial only works for so long. My roommate, Kyle, was the first to call me on it. "Bro, you just disappeared for hours yesterday. Where'd you go?" His words jolted me because I had no clue. I laughed it off, saying I needed some air, but I hadn't left my bed all day, or at least, I think I hadn't. I decided to keep a journal to track these gaps, like what the psychologists suggest, right? Maybe I was just recording my descent into madness, little sketches of absence detailing places and faces I didn't remember meeting at times I couldn't account for. But the gaps weren't just in time anymore. I began waking up with scars, shallow, thin like paper cuts tracing patterns on my arms. Once, I awoke with dirt under my nails and a lingering scent of earth clinging to me as if I'd clawed up from a grave. Still, I kept it under wraps. I couldn't lose my job over unfounded fears, and more importantly, I couldn't admit the depth of my fear. Then, last Tuesday, something happened that I can't ignore. I came to an unfamiliar apartment building. I was in front of a door, key in hand, poised to enter as if I lived there, and that's when I heard whispering. Holding my breath, I pressed my ear against the cold door, the wood vibrating with soft murmurs of a conversation too low to understand. That's when I remembered more vividly. I'd been here before, outside this very door many times, though I never recalled stepping inside. I had no idea who or what awaited me on the other side. Panic gripped me, more lifelike than anything else felt in those days, forcing clarity into my fogged-over mind, and I bolted. I've been retracing my steps ever since, the rare few I remember, to recover my past. Kyle noticed the anxiety shadowing me as if I'd been marked by something unseen. He suggested adopting a pet, a grounding mechanism. The familiarity would help, he said. But something inside me feared what I'd do if I blacked out around a living thing incapable of judgment. What if No, I'd rather not dwell on that possibility. My efforts to understand dragged me to online forums, a futile quest for similar stories lost in narrative threads and strange coincidences. I found a post by a user, Shadow Skip, detailing their own experiences, eerily similar to mine, down to location-specific incidents. Without overthinking, I messaged them. We needed to connect, share our puzzle pieces. Their response chilled me. We shouldn't meet. It'll make it worse. They always find you when you remember. I never sleep peacefully now, and the new scars seeping red are hard to dismiss. I think I'm unraveling. I got an email from a stranger yesterday. No subject, just a link. I hesitated, hovered over the link, and finally clicked. A live feed, grainy and dark, like old security footage. My heart stopped as I saw someone entering the apartment from my vision, a figure clothed in shadow, but as they turned to the camera, even in the blur, it was unmistakably me. Monday's just around the corner, and I dread waking up in front of that door again. I've stopped journaling, abandoned all narratives of then and now, trying only to survive where reality and forgetfulness blur with each breath. Maybe this is my confession, or a cry for help, or a simple warning: beware the memory gaps, and if you ever hear whispering outside a door you don't remember, don't enter. For now, I'll keep pretending, hoping this message reaches someone before it's too late, just like it was for Shadow Skip.